Now on to Josephus's four-empire view. With his section on Daniel is that he does cover chapter 2 of Daniel with Nebuchadnezzar's dream. There's not a need to go through all of it, but you can see that we are working off of that event, with the statue being described, except for the feet, are not described with being mixed with clay by Josephus. Josephus says that the head of gold is Babylon, but like before, he adds some interpretation into the story by saying that the kings before Nebuchadnezzar are also part of the head of gold. Historically, only Nebuchadnezzar's dad ruled with sovereignty over Babylon after defeating the Assyrians in 612 BC. Josephus goes on saying that Babylon is going to fall by 2 kings. This is the silver section, but again, Josephus adds in his interpretation that the crossed arms signified a unified empire with 2 kings. Later in chapter 11, he says the 2 kings were Cyrus and Darius. The identity of Darius we have covered before, so go check out that video for a really in-depth coverage of it. And from Josephus is that we see Darius was called by another name according to the Greeks, which was Cyaxares, number 2, the son of Astyages, who is referred to as Darius in Daniel, and the family chart here shows that he was the uncle of Cyrus the Great. This joint empire of the Medes and Persians is consistently described in the book of Daniel. And regardless if a person doesn't want to accept what the Bible says, is that historians, ancient historians, and reliefs all describe the Medes and Persians aligned together, or at worst has the Persians holding dominance over the Medes. But their combination all predated the fall of Babylon, not after. Either way, they are described as combined. So we definitely know that Josephus has Babylon as the first and Medo-Persia as the second empire in his scheme. Now on to the third. But another king that shall come from the west, armed with brass, shall destroy that second government. This too has an interpretive addition in the description, as a king coming from the west is not in Daniel 2. What Josephus did was incorporate Daniel 8's he-goat descriptions. Josephus does bring up Daniel 8's prophecies in chapter 8 of his work, and there he brings up the ram and goat. The goats, 4 horns that follow the great horn, then the little horn that comes out of one of the 4. Josephus sticks with Daniel 8, saying that the ram is the unified empire of the kingdoms of the Medes and Persians, and the goat is the Greek empire. So it's obvious that Josephus had the Greeks as the third empire, but in this process, we can add in his chapter 8 alignment with Daniel 2 in his scheme. The Greek little horn is identified as Antiochus Epiphanes by him. So when it comes to the Fourth Empire, I hope we all know what the critic's narrative is by this point. But those that are actually honest with themselves will say, hey, yeah, okay, Babylon's 1, Medo-Persia 2, Greek 3. But they'll usually try to say, oh, but the Seleucids are the 4th one. We have shown the numerous textual and historical problems with that approach. And Josephus didn't see the Seleucids as a separate empire either, as he, in Book 12, Chapter 7, discusses the fulfillment of Daniel 8's little horn with Antiochus Epiphanes. And here, Josephus sees Antiochus Epiphanes falling under the third empire umbrella of the Greek Empire, as Alexander was a Macedonian. So, Josephus is not splitting the Seleucids off and making them the 4th, as some critics try to do. So, identifying Josephus's 4th empire should be obvious by now, but we'll let him speak for himself, as right after in chapter 11's description of Antiochus is that Josephus says the following. In the very same manner, Daniel also wrote concerning the Roman government, and that our country should be made desolate by them. So, Rome is clearly the 4th, but Josephus wasn't saying Daniel 8 was about Rome. We'll actually come back to that question if that came in your head in a little bit. But back in chapter 10, covering the statue is that he describes the fourth empire in the following way. And another government that shall be like unto iron shall put an end to the power of the former, and shall have dominion over all the earth, on account of the nature of iron, which is stronger than that of gold, of silver, and of brass. We know that Josephus places Rome as the Iron Empire, as he sequentially has them after the Macedonian Empire, as does the rest of the world. And does this because history records Rome conquering each of the four sub-kingdoms, becoming the new superpower in the Mideast. Now, there's no way to argue against this four-empire scheme of Josephus that we just laid out here. Now, what about the uncut stone from Daniel 2 you might be thinking about? Well, Josephus does mention it right after his Iron Empire description and says the following. Daniel did also declare the meaning of the stone to the king, but I do not think, Josephus, do not think it proper to relate it, since I have only undertaken to describe things past or things present, but not things that are in the future. Yet, if anyone be so very desirous of knowing the truth, as not to waive such points of curiosity, and cannot curb his inclination for understanding the uncertainties of futurity, and whether they will happen or not, let him be diligent in reading the book of Daniel, which he will find among the sacred writings. Now, what Josephus said was that the stone's destruction of the statue, that includes the Fourth Empire, is still a future event, and that would come after the 70 AD destruction in his mind, and after 94 AD when Josephus wrote his Antiquities work. So, although Jerusalem and the temple have been leveled to the ground by the Romans, and Rome is only getting bigger and stronger at this point in history, is that Josephus believes and knows in his head that God is going to end them and all other pagan Gentile empires one day, and will establish his own global everlasting kingdom on earth. And I believe that Josephus didn't include this tidbit because he was probably a little bit afraid of some potential backlash. He's writing under Roman authority, so he kind of, tiptoed around this by not going into the end game of God himself destroying the empires that includes Rome one day. Now, what prophecy of Daniel's was Josephus drawing upon when he said that Rome was prophesied to make the nation of Israel desolate by them? What I think is obvious here is that Josephus was referring to the 70 AD destruction. I think everybody should agree on that point. The city and temple were leveled to the ground, so they were desolate. Now, out of Daniel's prophecies is that you can see here that Josephus does not bring up Daniel 7, 9, or 11 through 12 in his work. Daniel 7:25 is the closest that chapter has with the Fourth Empire. Gets to talking about destroying the city and temple, but there's nothing in the text that deals exactly with that situation. It's more about the little horn persecuting the people like Antiochus did, not about destroying the city or the temple. So I think it's safe to say that that wasn't what Josephus had in mind. And this is a key reminder that Josephus is a futurist in regards to the Fourth Empire's ultimate destruction, which, by logical extension, Josephus would understand Daniel 7:25 as future as well. And so, also, neither does Daniel 11 through 12 talk about the city and temple being destroyed. That parallels Daniel 7 with future everlasting righteousness in God's kingdom. So, chapter 11 through 12 should be eliminated as well, leaving only the 70 weeks prophecy, which does contain a prophecy of Jerusalem and the temple being destroyed with the key word Sahat that has use with total destruction of the earth with a flood, or the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, and Nebuchadnezzar's destruction of Jerusalem. So you get the idea. It's a total wiping out effect. Now, an argument that could be made against this is that Josephus didn't use the same word. However, Daniel 9:2 does, with the 70 years of desolation of Jerusalem, which was a total destruction of the city and temple. And Luke, in 21:20, has it too, with Jesus' prophecy of the temple being destroyed, and I might add 40 years in advance. So, it's not a deal breaker that Josephus had a different word choice than the Septuagint, because there's a whole nother video as to why there's a difference in there. Whereas Josephus was using Daniel 9:2's term, the Greek translation term. So I think it's safe to say that 9:26 was what Josephus had in mind, and that his four-empire scheme is as such, along with this now giving us his potential 70 weeks view, our first glimpse of it. But before moving on to that, is that let's look at how Josephus closes out this section on Daniel's prophecies. All these things did this man leave in writing, as God had showed them to him, insomuch that such as read his prophecies, and see how they have been fulfilled, would wonder at the honor wherewith God would honor Daniel, and may thence discover how the Epicureans are in error, who cast providence out of human life, and do not believe that God takes care of the affairs of the world, nor that the universe is governed and continued in being by that blessed and immortal nature. But say that the world is carried along of its own accord, without a ruler or a curator, which were it destitute of a guide to conduct it, as they imagine, it would be like ships without pilots, which we see drowned by the winds, or like chariots without drivers, which are overturned. So would the world be dashed to pieces by its being carried without a providence, and so perish and come to naught. Doesn't this sound a lot like how naturalists speak today? So that, by the forementioned predictions of Daniel, those men seem to me very much to err from the truth, who determine that God exercises no providence over human affairs. Now as to myself, I have so described these matters as I have found them and read them. But if anyone is inclined to another opinion about them, let him enjoy his different sentiments without any blame from me. Reminder, hit the subscribe button below, turn on the notification bell, hit the like button, and leave a comment. And don't forget to visit us at justscripture.org. And in the meantime, stay salty.